Okay, so today we're going to look at the quadratic formula, but for our warm-up, we're going to look at a problem that has no solutions. So if we have x plus 3 squared plus 9 equals 0, we can solve this directly without the quadratic formula. So what's done first is we subtract 9 from both sides and get x plus 3 squared equals negative 9. And then taking the square root of both sides, we have x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 9. So in studying the example, when did you realize it had no solutions? So I realized right here, the square root of a negative is undefined. So I'm going to write down when I took the square root of negative 9, and then just put a period or comma. It is undefined. So we can look at that graphically as well. So if I plug the calculator, or plug the function into the calculator, put x plus 3 squared, and then plus 9, and graph it, you can see that the quadratic function or the parabola does not touch the x-axis, so it has no functions. So now we have to explain how we know 49 plus x squared has no solutions. So what I'm going to do is just rewrite the equation and solve for x. So I'm going to subtract 49 from both sides to make 0. And I have x squared equals negative 49. To undo the squaring, I'm going to take the square root. So we would have x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 49. And again, this is undefined. So we can see that that's going to have no solutions. So now I'm going to move on to our next task. And we're going to talk about the potato and the pumpkin. So we're going to answer each of these questions without graphing. So the equation h of t equals negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 64 represents the height, so h of t is height in feet of a potato t seconds after it has been launched. So now write an equation that can be solved to find when the potato hits the ground. Well, I'm going to assume that when the potato hits the ground, that means we're at 0 feet. So I'm going to plug in 0 for h of t and say that 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 80t plus 64. And then you need to write an equation that can be solved when, I need to solve that equation. So I'm actually going to continue that work down here for a. And I'm going to use the quadratic equation. So I'm going to say that a, the coefficient of t squared, is negative 16, that b equals 80, and that c equals 64. Then I'm going to write the quadratic equation, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Then I'm going to substitute in the numbers. So x equals negative 80 plus or minus the square root of 80 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 64. And then I'm going to use technology to calculate that discriminant after I finish the equation, right? 2 times negative 16. So clearing out what we had there, I'm going to clear out and get ready to plug in the square root of 80 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 64. And when I do that, I'm going to get 102.45. So I'm going to write x equals negative 80 plus or minus 102.45 all over 2 times negative 16 is negative 32. So I'm going to break that up. X equals negative 80 plus 102.45 divided by negative 32. And I'm going to calculate that. So I'm going to put parentheses and go negative 80 plus 102.45. And I did that because I have the division bar, so I need to add those first, and then divide by negative 32. And this is at x equals negative 0.70 seconds. And that actually doesn't make sense in terms of our problem because you can't go back in time. So we're going to calculate the other root or 0 and go negative 80 minus 102.45 and then divide by negative 32. So I'm just going to press second and then enter to redo this and then change the plus here to a minus and calculate that. And we have x equals 5.70 seconds. So that was for question A. For question B, write an equation that can be solved to find when the potato is 40 feet in the air. So instead of plugging h of t equals 0, we're going to plug in 40. So we have 40 equals negative 16 t squared plus 80 t plus 64. And then I need to move the 40 over to the other side. So I'm going to subtract 40 from both sides. And then I get 0 equals negative 16 t squared plus 80 t plus 24. And then I'm going to use a quadratic formula again. So I'm going to say A equals negative 16, B equals 80, and C equals 24. And then I'm going to substitute and solve. So x equals negative 80 plus or minus the square root of 80 squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 24 all over 2 times negative 16. So I'm going to calculate that discriminant again. So I'm going to do the square root of 80 squared minus, oh, and I put 40 there. That should be 4. So let me cross that out. So minus 4 times negative 16 times 24. And that gives me 89.08. So this is going to be x equals negative 80 plus or minus 89.08 all over negative 32. So we have two roots, x equals negative 80 plus 89.08 divided by negative 32. And x equals negative 80 minus 89.08 all divided by negative 32. Let me just put in my parentheses. So negative 80 plus 89.08 then divided by negative 32. And we get x is equal to negative 0.28. Then I'm going to use my calculator again and hit second entry, substitute in a minus, and I get 5.28. seconds. So this is a number that makes sense because you can't go back in time again. So for number 2, the equation 2 plus 23.7t minus 4t squared models height in meters. after it has been launched. Is the pumpkin still in the air 8 seconds later? Explain or show how you know. So this question, we're actually going to plug in 8 seconds for t. So we would say g of 8 seconds equals 2 plus 23.7 times 8 minus 4.9 times 8 squared. Then I'm going to evaluate that with my calculator. Type in 2 plus 23.7 times 8 minus 4.9 times 8 squared. And I see that this gives me negative 122, which would be meters. And that means the pumpkin is below the ground. So no, the pumpkin already hit the ground. So at what value t does a pumpkin hit the ground? So we just substitute 0 for g of t. So 0 equals, and I'm going to rewrite the equation in standard form. So I'm going to put negative 4.9 t squared first, plus 23.7 t second, and then plus 2. So I just put the t in order from the highest power to the lowest. I'm going to identify my a, b, and c. So a equals negative 4.9, b equals 23.7, c equals 2. And then I'm going to substitute in the numbers. So x equals negative b, so negative 23.7, plus or minus the square root of 23.7 squared minus 4 times a, negative 4.9 times c, which is 2, all over 2 times a, so all over 2 times negative 4.9. I'm going to calculate this discriminant first. Let me just close that parentheses. So I'm going to go 23.7 squared minus 4 times negative 4.9 times 2. And I got 600.89. So x equals negative 23.7 plus or minus 600.89, all divided by, and I'm going to multiply out 2 times negative 4.9, and I got negative 9.8. So to separate that, x equals negative 23.7 plus 600.89 divided by 9.8, and x equals negative 23.7 minus 600.89, all divided by negative 9.8. So I'm going to calculate those two answers using parentheses, negative 23.7 plus 600.89 divided by negative 9.8. And here we have x equals negative 58.90, which doesn't make sense. And then I'm going to redo that, just press second entry, and then minus there. And I have x equals 63.73 seconds. And then that is our answer. That makes sense in this situation. So our final lesson, we tried to find a picture frame that was 7 inches by 4 inches using an entire sheet of paper that was 4 inches by 2.5 inches. This is our equation that we wrote. So explain or show what the equation 7 plus 2x plus 4 or times 4 plus 2x equals 38. So this right here is our length. This right here is our width. Our 38 is our area. So our length is 7 inches plus 2 inches, or 2x, because this is x and x. And then our width is 4 inches plus x and x. So in the diagram, this would actually be our 7 inches, and then we have our x and x. So this becomes on the bottom 7 plus 2x. And then here, our width is 4 plus an x and an x. So that becomes 4 plus 2x. And then our overall area is 28. So now we have to solve the equation. We're actually going to skip question 2. So we're going to solve the equation. If I have 7 plus 2x times 4 plus 2x equals 38. In order to solve that, we have to distribute. So 7 times 4 is 28. 7 times 2x, I add 14x. 2x times 4, I add 8x. And then 2x times 2x, I add 4x squared. And then that equals 38. I'm going to write this in standard form. So I'm going to write my 4x squared first. I'm going to combine my like terms on x's. So 14x plus 8x becomes 22x. And then I'm going to add 28, but I'm actually going to make that 0 and subtract 38 from both sides. So here I'm minus 10, and then that equals 0. I'm going to solve this using the quadratic formula. So a equals 4, b equals 22, and c equals negative 10. So using the quadratic formula, x equals negative b, or x equals negative 22, plus or minus the square root of 22 squared minus 4 times a is 4 times c is negative 10, all over 2 times a. So I'm just going to write down 2 times 4 is 8. Now I'm going to calculate the value of the discriminant. So I'm going to put in the square root of 22 squared minus 4 times 4 times negative 10. And we get x equals negative 22 plus or minus. I'm going to round that to 2 decimal places, so 25.37 all over 8. So then I'm going to calculate my 2 possibilities. So x equals negative 22 plus 25.37 all over 8. And x equals negative 22 minus 25.37 all over 8. So now calculating those 2 possibilities, we go negative, and I need my parentheses. So parentheses negative 22 plus 25.37 all divided by 8. We have x equals 0.42. And then putting that in, we have x equals negative 5.92. So in looking at that, I notice that x equals 0.42 doesn't makes sense in this situation, because this is going to be 0.42 of an inch, which is about a half an inch. So that is my solution. And as an added challenge, you may go through and calculate number 2, but I'm not going to show you that here.